On the second day of the new year, I went to my mother's house to pay New Year's respects. My father-in-law not only took my New Year's gifts, but also put poison in the wine. What was supposed to be a joyful New Year celebration turned into a tragedy. My entire family died a terrible death. Once again, when I opened my eyes, I saw my father-in-law changing my gifts again. This time, I quietly switched them back. Sienna, pass the New Year's gifts for the children to take back to their mother's house. Don't forget to bring them when you go back later. My mother-in-law said as she arranged the gifts. I was stunned for a moment. Didn't I die? Wasn't I supposed to be dead on the way to my mother's house? I looked around and saw the red paper scraps all over the backyard after the firecrackers were set off. And at that moment, I suddenly realized the truth. I must have been reborn. Reborn on the morning of the second day of the new year. Realizing this, a surge of intense excitement welled up inside me, my heart pounding violently in my chest. But before I could react, I heard my father-in-law's cold voice ringing out. His sharp, commanding tone echoed in the air. He said that some of his good friends had come to pay New Year's respects. He ordered us to postpone our visit to my mother's house for a day. Why? Why did we have to delay it? Moreover, he pointed at the bottle of wine and said, "Didn't I buy this for myself? Why are you taking it back to your mother's house? Is this about going to your mother's house, or cleaning out our family's belongings? I'm going to donate them to charity." His words were like ice. He was clearly not following any rules. I looked at my father-in-law's stern, emotionless face, and at that moment, memories from my past life rushed back like a storm. It was also on the morning of the second day of the new year, when he had suddenly appeared and told us to postpone our visit. He had said that some close friends had come to celebrate the new year, and he wanted to introduce them to my husband, Ethan. But we had already prepared in advance. Following the tradition, the second day was meant for visiting my mother's house. Even though both families were in the same city, they were not in the same county. The distance between them was nearly 100 kilometers, a 2-hour drive. That's why I had prepared early in the morning to go to my mother's house, and had even informed my parents on New Year's Eve. They were waiting for us. They had prepared everything carefully. Even my grandparents and uncle had come to gather together for the occasion. But who would have thought? Who would have thought that my father-in-law would try to change the date? On the first day, we visit the father's family. On the second day, the mother's family. And on the third day, the daughter-in-law's family. That is the tradition. And I had firmly refused to change it. I had insisted on taking Ethan and our daughter to my mother's house. When we arrived, it was already after 10 a.m. As expected, many relatives were there. My mother had prepared 2 large tables of food. Everything seemed perfect. I had opened the bottle of wine I had personally prepared for everyone to drink together. But then it happened. After the whole family had lunch, my uncles and father, who loved drinking, suddenly clutched their stomachs in agony. Their screams filled the house. They writhed in pain, their faces twisted in horror. Panic. Chaos. Someone shouted for an ambulance. They were rushed to the hospital. And then it was too late. The doctors said that the wine had been poisoned. Poisoned? By the time they were taken to the hospital, it was already too late. They died. They all died. My father, my uncles, my brothers. A joyful New Year's celebration turned into a funeral. And then, they blamed me. Why did you bring poison into our house? Why did you kill our family? Their angry, accusing voices tore into me like knives. I was in shock. How could this happen? It was my wine. I had bought it myself. It had never been opened before. How could it be poisoned? The first person I suspected was the wine seller. I had to report this. I had to tell someone. But before I could say a single word, my father-in-law grabbed me, dragged me to the river beside the road. And then, he pushed me in. The water closed over me. I struggled. I screamed. I fought. But the river was too strong. And I drowned. I died. I died knowing the truth. He had done it. My father-in-law had done it. Because I didn't listen to him. Because I refused to obey. Because I had insisted on going to my mother's house. So he switched my New Year's gifts. He put poison in them. And when his plan was revealed, he had me killed to silence me. Now, I was reborn. And I knew exactly what was going to happen. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. My father-in-law was still speaking. His voice was cold, dismissive. Visiting your mother's house on the second day is not necessary. You can go on the third or fourth. Since you have married into the B family, you should be a member of the B family. Don't you know who is superior and who is inferior? I sneered. Oh, I knew. I knew exactly what he was trying to do. Who doesn't know who is superior and who is inferior? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Visiting my mother's house on the third or fourth day is a choice. But visiting on the second day, that is tradition. His face darkened. And then, slap. His hand struck my face. The impact sent me crashing to the ground. Pain exploded in my cheek. My head spun. The anger inside me flared. But then I looked up. And when I saw his fierce, heartless face, I calmed down, because I knew something else. In my past life, I had never argued with him. And yet, he still poisoned my family. He still killed me. Not this time. This time, I would make sure he paid. Some people will never respect you unless you teach them how. In my past life, I had been too soft, too accommodating. I had endured humiliation and betrayal, thinking that love and patience would change things. But this time I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. I took a deep breath, suppressing the cold rage that threatened to surface. My mother-in-law saw my expression and gently tugged my sleeve, whispering, Sienna, just endure it. Don't make a scene on the second day of the new year. Endure? I had endured enough in my past life, and where had it gotten me? Betrayed, poisoned, and drowned in a river. I straightened my posture and walked back out, my eyes sweeping over Ethan and Diana as they casually clinked their cups together once more. A sudden thought struck me. I wondered if the same bottle of wine they were drinking from now was also specially prepared by my father-in-law. A slow smile spread across my lips. Fine. If they wanted to play, then I would make sure they lost everything. I turned and walked toward the cabinet where my father-in-law kept his liquor. Casually, I picked up a bottle of wine identical to the one he had switched earlier. Turning back, I called out cheerfully, Since everyone's having such a great time, how about a proper toast? Ethan frowned, clearly irritated by my presence. What are you up to now? I ignored him and instead looked at Diana. Miss Diana, since you're such an important childhood friend of my husband, it would be rude if I didn't personally welcome you back home. Here, let me pour you a drink. She blinked, then laughed lightly, as if my words held no weight. Oh, there's no need. I had already opened the bottle and poured a full glass for her. Come now, don't refuse. A toast to the new year and to old friends. The moment the glass was in front of her, she hesitated. Perhaps she sensed something in my tone, or maybe she noticed that I was looking at her with a little too much amusement. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed irritated with my theatrics. Enough, Sienna. Stop causing trouble. I turned to him with a smile, pouring another glass. Of course, Ethan. You should drink too. His expression darkened. He looked at the bottle in my hand, and a flicker of hesitation crossed his face. That's when I knew. He recognized it. He had known about the poisoned wine all along. Diana glanced at him, clearly confused by his reaction. Ethan. He forced a laugh, pushing the glass away. I already drank earlier. You go ahead. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only he could hear. What's wrong, darling? Afraid to drink it. His jaw tightened. For a split second, I saw panic in his eyes, but then he quickly masked it with irritation. I straightened up, taking both glasses and placing them in front of Diana and Ethan. Then I raised my own empty glass. Come on, let's toast. Diana hesitated. She looked between me and Ethan. The mood had changed. The other guests, sensing the tension, had stopped playing cards and were now watching. My father-in-law stepped forward suddenly, his expression dark. Sienna, that's enough. I turned to him, smiling sweetly. Father, you always say we should respect traditions. Isn't it tradition to drink a toast together? His fists clenched. Ethan suddenly stood up. I said, that's enough. He grabbed Diana's wrist and pulled her up. We're leaving. Diana seemed completely bewildered. Ethan, what's going on? I crossed my arms and watched them with amusement. Oh, leaving so soon? But we haven't even finished celebrating. Are you sure you don't want to drink first? Ethan shot me a glare so full of hatred that it almost made me laugh. He knew. He knew that I knew. My father-in-law's face was turning red with fury, but he couldn't expose me without exposing himself. I had won this round, and it was only the beginning. Birds of a feather flock together, and people are divided into groups. Looking at these people, I finally understood that this saying is indeed true. Just keep playing and having fun for another hour, then I will send all of you on your way at 12:30. The main meal officially began. There were 8 people at the dining table, including my father-in-law Ethan, and their guests. Just enough seats, of course. There were no chairs for me and my mother-in-law. It was the same every year, so I wasn't surprised, but this year, even though I noticed it, I didn't care. I just obediently sat with my mother-in-law and my daughter at the small tea table, eating. While thinking about what was about to happen, I couldn't suppress my excitement. The wine I bought for my father was all good wine. With my father-in-law's face-conscious personality, he would definitely take out those bottles of wine to entertain his guests. He was clearly not poor to the point of being destitute and hungry, but he couldn't bear to see me buy expensive gifts for my mother's family, to the extent of buying fake ones to switch. Perhaps this was not the first time he had switched my gifts. I just didn't know. My parents probably thought that I had also been cheated by the seller since my daughter rarely came home. They didn't care much about those material things. The more I thought about it, the more I hated it. I silently stared at them. Sure enough, my father-in-law told Ethan to go get the wine I had bought. Ethan then asked me to go get it. This had become a habit in this family. Whenever there was something to do, he would push it on to me. Normally, I wouldn't be able to endure it and would argue back. But today was different. I immediately stood up excitedly and went to get it. Unexpectedly, my father-in-law stopped me and then told Ethan, you go get it yourself. The wine behind the door is all for your father's old colleagues and your old classmates. They should drink something good. I knew exactly why he stopped me. It wasn't because he was worried that I wouldn't recognize the wine, but because he was afraid that I would discover that he had switched the wine. So I very obediently sat back in my seat and continued to take care of my daughter until I saw Ethan bring out the bottle of wine that my father-in-law had switched. Only then did I completely relax. Drink it all, drink until you all die. At this moment, Diana's voice rang out, why don't you and your sister-in-law come over here and sit with us? We can squeeze a little. After all, both of you have been busy all morning. Thanks to speaking up my mother-in-law, and I finally had the chance to sit at the dining table. My father-in-law, like the head of the family, spoke up and ordered Sienna, pour a glass of wine for Miss Diana, and thank her. Looking at the scene, I couldn't help but laugh. I really doubted, whose house is this anyway? Do we have to rely on an outsider to speak up for my mother-in-law and me, to be allowed to sit at the dining table in our own home? But I didn't say anything. I just stood up, raised my glass seriously, and said, thank you, Miss Diana. It's because of you that my mother-in-law and I have the opportunity to sit at the dining table in our own home. I wonder if you are the real mistress of this house. This statement, no matter how you look at it, was full of sarcasm. Unfortunately, none of the people present were ordinary. They all thought this was a matter of course. Only my mother-in-law's face was a little hard to look at. She slightly tightened her hand on mine, signaling me not to take it to heart. After my mother-in-law and I sat down, Diana along with Ethan, and the two men began to reminisce about their high school days. They completely ignored my existence. At the end, Diana even laughed and said, Ethan, do you still remember you were good at drawing back? Then you even drew many pictures for me. She looked at Ethan meaningfully and said with a smile, I still keep those pictures to this day. Ethan's eyes lit up with joy and he asked, really? Diana smiled lightly and said, of course it's true. Ethan wanted to say something else, but my mother-in-law glared at him and said, hurry up and serve some food to your wife and child. Diana, on the other hand, laughed as if she hadn't heard and said, that's right, Ethan, your sister-in-law is still here. My father-in-law immediately frowned and said, so what if she's here? Can't we talk about the past? I sneered and said, of course we can. It wouldn't matter if Ethan and I divorced so that you two could get back together. My father-in-law, who had drunk several glasses of wine, slammed his cup on the table and his face turned dark. Do you think Ethan wouldn't dare to divorce you? I said to her. If it weren't for Diana going abroad back, then the daughter-in-law of this family would have been Diana. My mother-in-law couldn't bear it anymore and immediately glared at my father-in-law, saying, "What nonsense are you talking?" After drinking a few cups of wine, my father-in-law immediately became annoyed and said, "Where am I talking nonsense? I heard that the two of you were in love back in high school." Diana, Ethan, did you two really love each other back in high school? My mother-in-law couldn't stand it anymore and immediately put a piece of food in her mouth, saying, Eat more so you won't talk nonsense." But she kept arguing back, and finally my father-in-law couldn't bear it anymore and slapped my mother-in-law's face. You old woman, I just said one sentence, and you dare to argue with me at the beginning of the year? Are you deliberately trying to make me angry? I instinctively caught my mother-in-law, but the anger inside me could no longer be contained. I immediately overturned the dining table. You old man. Are you crazy? How dare you make a scene in front of so many people, you despicable old man? Do you think I'm a docile cat? Just because I don't speak up. Along with the overturning of the table, the bowls and plates fell to the ground and shattered noisily. Everyone in the room was stunned, almost unable to believe their eyes staring at me. My father-in-law reacted immediately, his face turning purple with anger, as he shouted loudly, "You wretched woman! How dare you overturn the table in my house, you ungrateful creature! Don't you have a mother to teach you manners today? I must teach you a lesson." With that, he raised his hand to strike me, but the people around him quickly intervened to hold him back. Richard, is it really necessary to go to such lengths at the beginning of the year? Diana also reacted in time, pretending to be shocked and scolding sister-in-law. How could you go crazy at the beginning of the year and overturn the table right in front of Uncle? Is there no decency left? I slapped her straight across the face, saying, "Shut your dog's mouth. How's our family's business related to you? What kind of upbringing did you receive to interfere in other people's affairs? You keep bringing up high school stories. Do you want me to give up my place to you?" Diana was so shocked that she stood there dumbfounded, and the others also stared at her with wide eyes. Their faces turned cold as they released my father-in-law and looked at me with cold, piercing gazes. Sure enough, my father-in-law, like an enraged lion, lunged straight at me, roaring, "You wretched woman! How dare you defy me? If I don't beat you to death today, I won't be a man of the B family." But before his hand could reach me, he suddenly let out a painful scream and clutched his stomach. The others, who had been preparing to watch the drama, suddenly changed their expressions. They quickly rushed over to support him, asking, Richard, what's wrong with you? Are you okay?" Before they could finish speaking, one by one they also began to scream in pain, clutching their stomachs, their faces turning pale as they collapsed to the ground. Ethan and Diana, who had drunk the least, were so terrified by the sight that they were momentarily stunned. They quickly ran over to help the adults up, but then, as if realizing something, Diana suddenly turned her head and glared at me in horror, exclaiming, "Sienna, did you poison the food?" I looked at her as if she were a fool, my tone dripping with contempt. "I ate the same dish as everyone else. Tell me, how could I have poisoned it?" Diana was so bewildered that she couldn't comprehend what was happening, but before she could think it through, she suddenly clutched her stomach and collapsed, rolling on the floor in agony. One by one the others also fell, writhing in pain. My mother-in-law, who had just been slapped by my father-in-law and was now completely stunned, stared in shock as she exclaimed, "Oh my God, what's going on here?" I also cooperated by clutching my stomach, pretending to be in a panic and horror, urging my mother-in-law to call an ambulance. Each person was taken to the hospital, just like in my past life. Because of a slight delay, 2 out of the 3 friends my father-in-law had brought were dead. The remaining one, along with my father-in-law, was paralyzed on one side and lay flat on the bed. Another person became a fool, completely losing his mind. The father of Diana also died among Ethan's close friends, when one person had already lost his life and the other was still in the intensive care unit. Only Diana and Ethan were fortunate to survive. Of course, there was me, because I had only drunk 1 glass at that time and was the last to drink, having the least amount. The doctor concluded that they had all consumed a large amount of rat poison. When this news spread, the entire apartment complex was shocked. My house was on the first floor with a private courtyard. When the incident happened, there were so many ambulances at the scene that it was impossible to hide anything. No one could have imagined that a New Year's meal would turn into a deadly feast. The relatives of my father-in-law and Ethan almost fainted on the spot when they received the news. They all wished they could fight to the death with my father-in-law, but before they could take action, Ethan woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he immediately grabbed my collar, his eyes bloodshot with hatred, and shouted furiously, "Was it you? Did you, the wretched woman, poison us?" At this moment, Ethan was as weak as a child. I could have pushed him down with just a slight push and he would have fallen to the ground. I stood above him, looking down at him with a tone of contempt. "Are you crazy? How could I have poisoned anyone?" Diana was also too weak to get up, But she still glared at me with resentment. If it wasn't you, then who else could it be here? Ethan gnashed his teeth, his eyes filled with malice. F on me. Yes, is it because you hated that Diana and I were in love back in high school that you wanted to kill all of us? As soon as these words were spoken, they immediately angered the relatives of the deceased. They went crazy and lunged at me. You wretched woman, so it was you who killed my husband. I will kill you, you heartless woman. Give me back my son. I will tear you apart. Diana screamed in pain, her voice full of hatred. Sienna, you wicked woman. I will call the police. I will definitely call the police to catch this murderer. I coldly looked at the people rushing towards me, my tone full of warning. Whoever dares to touch me, just try. I have already called the police. Whoever dares to touch me, I will make sure you all go to jail. At this moment we were in my father-in-law's hospital room. Since he woke up he had been pale and silent, but now upon hearing that I had called the police his face immediately changed. He became panicked, and then angrily scolded me. You wretched woman, who gave you the right to call the police? I coldly looked at him. Why can't I call the police? My father-in-law glared at me, fiercely grinding his teeth. It's you, you wretched woman. You killed them all. You are the murderer. After saying this, he struggled to lunge at me as if he wanted to kill me on the spot. I stood calmly on the side and said indifferently, whether I am a murderer or not is not for you to decide, but for the police to judge. Rest assured, I have already called the police. I believe they will soon find out the truth. My father-in-law immediately became terrified. Trembling all over, his panicked appearance made the relatives of the victims begin to doubt. They looked at him with suspicion. Richard, why are you so scared? Could it be that you're the one who did it? My father-in-law immediately panicked, his voice trembling as he denied it. No, it's not me. I've known those brothers for so many years. How could I poison and kill them? He pointed straight at me and screamed frantically, it's her, that wretched woman. She killed them all. It's her. A middle-aged woman in the group spoke up, saying Richard might be right. She was jealous that my daughter had once loved Ethan, so she wanted to kill everyone. I realized that she was the mother of Diana. In fact, there was no need for rat poison. Even if Diana's father had lived, he wouldn't have lived long either, because in my past life he also died of a stroke during the new year. After his death, my mother-in-law also passed away not long after. It turned out that the two of them had been having an affair for a long time, which was why she wanted to destroy my marriage with Ethan and force her daughter to marry into the B family so that the two families could truly become one. Her words made the people around even more indignant. They all glared at me, their eyes filled with hatred, as if they wanted to devour me to avenge their loved ones. But at this point none of them thought about calling the police. It was really ridiculous. They didn't call the police, but I had already done so. The police arrived quickly. In fact, this case was not difficult to investigate. The police soon found traces of rat poison in the wine they had drunk, and that wine was kept by my father-in-law. Therefore, the first person the police interrogated was my father-in-law. He had lost too many friends and had killed too many people. His spirit had already collapsed. After just a few questions, he screamed in a frenzy, I'm crazy. Those bottles of wine were in the New Year's gifts of that wretched woman, meant to be taken back to her mother's house. I didn't expect them to be brought to the dining table. I didn't mean to. I really didn't mean to. After saying this, he pointed straight at me and screamed, it's that wretched woman. She caused all of this. His words immediately revealed the truth of the matter. He himself admitted that he had switched my New Year's gifts, and that he was the one who had put rat poison in the wine. He screamed in despair, I didn't expect things to turn out like this. I really didn't expect to kill my own friends. Everyone present was stunned and couldn't believe it, but when they thought about their husband and sons dying at his hands, the hatred in their hearts immediately flared up. They lunged at him and punched and kicked him fiercely. His already weakened body couldn't withstand the strong blows, and finally he was taken straight to the emergency room for surgery. The police came again to interrogate me. They said they had found my fingerprints on the bottles of wine. I didn't deny it, but just showed a look as if I had just suffered a heavy blow. My voice trembled as I said those New Year gifts were all bought by me. I still have the receipts. On the second day, I originally planned to go to my mother's house, but my father-in-law didn't allow it. I had no choice but to stay and help with the cooking. Who would have thought that he would put rat poison in the wine and make me take it back to harm my family? As I spoke, I covered my face and burst into tears. What have I done wrong to my father-in-law that he hates me so much? Why does he hate my mother's family so much? I exerted myself to play the role of a daughter-in-law who had almost been murdered by her husband's family, and was determined not to return to the B family ever again. I also firmly demanded that the police investigate my appearance. Successfully dispelled all the police's doubts. After all, how could I have known that my father-in-law had put rat poison in the wine? Moreover, the fact that he had bought fake wine identical to mine was uncovered by the police. I had nothing to do with it. Of course, my fingerprints were on the wine bottle because I had to pour wine for everyone at the table. My father-in-law and Ethan often asked me to do this, and I also drank the poisoned wine. I was the victim. This news quickly spread in the apartment complex. From then on, everyone avoided the B family as if they had the plague. I took this opportunity to propose a divorce to Ethan. Of course, he refused to agree. At first, the hatred in my heart flared up fiercely. I slapped him hard across the face. You beast, your father wanted to kill my whole family. Do you still expect me to continue living with you? Ethan still looked at me with a tender and infatuated gaze and said softly, but wife, it was my father, not me. I have never wanted to hurt you. I slapped him again and said, shut up. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? As soon as you saw Diana, you regretted marrying me, didn't you? Ethan's body was already weakened after being slapped twice by me. He fell to the ground. My mother-in-law was horrified and quickly ran over to help her son up. I just coldly looked at her, my eyes devoid of any warmth. Your husband wanted to kill my whole family, and you still want to persuade me to continue living with your son? Finally, my mother-in-law realized something. She fell silent and dared not say another word, but Ethan still wouldn't let go. My mother-in-law slapped him straight across the face. Enough, you two, you have ruined my whole life. Don't continue to harm other people's daughters. How many lives separate the two of you? Do you still think you can continue to live together? Ethan's face turned pale, his lips trembled, and his voice was full of panic as he said, I didn't know. I really didn't know my father would do such a thing. I coldly cut him off and said, see you at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow. Ethan, I told him, if you don't agree to the divorce, I will ruin your reputation. Ethan's face immediately changed color. He was clearly very afraid that the fact that his father had wanted to kill my whole family would be exposed. If everyone knew, his life would be completely destroyed. With no other choice, he had to agree to the divorce with me. After successfully cutting ties with Ethan, I looked at my mother-in-law standing quietly beside me. She looked old and haggard. I thought back to the years I had been married to Ethan in this house. Although she didn't have much money, at least she was the only one who had ever protected me. That night I took her to the hospital. My father-in-law was still alive, but he was on his deathbed at that moment. The mother of Diana was crying uncontrollably. My father-in-law looked at her. Despite his aged body, his soul was still filled with desire. He spoke in a weak but determined voice, Julia, don't worry, I will try to live on. Wait until I get better. Wait until I get better, and I will divorce that old woman and marry you. It turned out that Julia was the name of the mother of Diana. She was sobbing, her voice choked with emotion. Richard, you must try hard. Old C is gone. I only have you left. These words made my mother-in-law's eyes bulge in disbelief at the scene before her. Then she suddenly pushed open the hospital room door and lunged at the woman, beating her fiercely. Julie Lee, you despicable adulterous couple, how dare you have an affair behind my back, and you still don't know shame? My mother-in-law made such a big scene that everyone knew about it. Only then did she realize that the affair between my father-in-law and the mother of Diana had been known to many people for a long time. Moreover, their ambiguous relationship was not a recent development but had been going on for years. This shock was too great for my mother-in-law to bear, and she completely collapsed. Finally, she decided to divorce my father-in-law, and this way she also fulfilled the wishes of my father-in-law and the mother of Diana. They wanted to merge the two families into one. However, my father-in-law was now bidan, and the mother of Diana could not bear to serve a disabled man. Seeing that his condition showed no signs of improvement, she quickly paired up with another old man and left my father-in-law to his fate, regardless of whether he lived or died. As for Ethan, after divorcing me, he originally intended to be with Diana, but when he found out that his mother had had an ambiguous relationship with his father, and that she had betrayed him, she completely fell apart. In the end, she angrily left the country. It must be said that my former father-in-law had a strong constitution. Despite being tormented over and over again, he still didn't die. Ethan had no choice but to take care of his father himself. As the saying goes, there are no filial children by the sick bed. This saying is indeed true, especially since Ethan was a selfish person. He couldn't endure it for even half a year. One night, he quietly suffocated his father to death in his sleep. I received the news that Ethan had died at the same time as I heard that he had killed his father. It is said that when he killed his father, a neighbor woke up to use the restroom and saw him. The neighbor immediately called the police. He panicked and fled, but unexpectedly had a traffic accident and died on the spot. When I took my daughter to pay respects, I happened to meet my former mother-in-law again. In just half a year, she had lost both her husband and her son. I was really worried about her, but she just smiled and said, don't worry about me. Now I have realized that so-called husbands, wives, parents, and children are just a part of the cycle of life. As a wife and a mother, I have done my best. Their current situation is what they brought upon themselves. She said that she was now traveling around the country with some old friends she had met at the Senior Citizens Club. She even showed me her social media account. Only then did I know that she had become a popular blogger with hundreds of thousands of followers. The story between my mother-in-law and me had come to an end. I hope she can break free from the shackles of the past. Now that she has found her freedom, I can also rest easy. Our brief mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship, which lasted for a few years, has come to a perfect conclusion. I believe that both she and I will be happy in the future.